past weekend. Joining us on the set is Michael Scheuer. He is the former CIA bin Laden unit chief and held that position from 1996 to 1999. He's here to talk to us about a possible al-Qaeda plot against D.C. and New York, how that's being investigated, and al-Qaeda post bin Laden. First, the headline in this morning's Wall Street Journal, 3 people sought in 9/11 anniversary plot. What can you tell us about that?
I don't know much more than what's in the paper, sir. I think they're probably very disturbed that the people got in here without us knowing it after all the money we've spent so far. But I think what it frames is that in the last 4 or 5 years of Osama bin Laden's life, there had been a discussion within al-Qaeda. Bin Laden always favored an attack bigger than 9/11 as the next step against the United States. And I think they continue to plan for that if they can do it. But he also has recruited a number of U.S. citizen Muslim males into his organization. And they are arguing in favor of more attacks along the lines of what Hamas does in Israel. Car bombs, attacks on pipelines for energy and water and gas, assassinations, car bombs. And I think without bin Laden there, that probably is moving ahead. And what we're seeing is kind of the first example of it. And unfortunately, if you look at what al-Qaeda has done in Iraq over the past 3 years, it's almost been like a laboratory for that kind of up-close, smaller-scale attack.
Wouldn't you think, though, that with this being the 10th anniversary of the 9/11 attacks, that with the death of bin Laden over the summer, that our intelligence apparatus would be hyper-vigilant and they would have been onto these 3 guys before this week?
I think that's what the Hollywood version of intelligence is always portrayed, sir. And I think most Americans believe that. But when you look at, the one thing the government hasn't mentioned so far is how these people got into the United States. It will be terrible if they got through an airport and through customs. But it's going to be worse politically in this country if they got across the border from Mexico or in from Canada, where there are no controls in some areas. So I think, yes, the intelligence community has been run ragged, as have the special forces trying to stop this kind of thing. But it's a big world, it's a big country, and in terms of our borders, the great majority of our maritime and our land borders are completely uncontrolled.
The headline in the Star-Ledger final edition on Monday, May the 2nd, emblematic of what was in a lot of papers. Justice has been done. U.S. raid kills al-Qaeda chief in Pakistan after a 10-year hunt. As the former chief of the CIA's counter-terrorist bin Laden unit, what were your thoughts when you heard about this? And did it happen the way that you thought it would happen, or how you had planned for it to happen when you were the bin Laden unit chief?
It did not happen the way we had planned it, because under Mr. Clinton we had no lethal authority. We could not have done this operation against bin Laden. We were directed to either capture him through a kidnapping, or to give the U.S. military opportunities to use their air power to kill him. And Mr. Clinton had 10 chances, used none of them. So I think Mr. Barack Obama, who I carry no brief for, deserves credit, because I think he acted on information inferior to that was available to Mr. Clinton. And thank goodness he did.
After, you say that you had 10 chances during the Clinton administration, but after the attacks on 9/11, what was the reality that bin Laden was going to be brought in alive?
I think the reality was very little. At least I argued, I worked until 2004, and I argued that we should never bring him in alive, simply because we didn't want him in the Southern District of New York speaking to the Arab world, the Muslim world, for 3 years in a trial. I think the President and the Special Forces and the CIA did exactly the right thing to kill him.
We're talking about the possible al-Qaeda plot against D.C. and New York, and also al-Qaeda in the post-bin Laden era. with Mike Scheuer. He's a former CIA bin Laden unit chief, and we'd like to get you involved in the conversation. The number's 202-624-1111 for Democrats. Republicans, 202-624-1115. Independents, 202-624-0760. You can also reach us electronically via email, Twitter, or conversations on Facebook. Talk to us about the structure and the moving ahead of Al-Qaeda post bin Laden.
I think it's important to emphasize what a tremendous tactical victory killing bin Laden was. He was a unique individual within Al-Qaeda, within the Muslim world generally, but it was not a strategic defeat for Al-Qaeda, unfortunately. We tend to live in an age of celebrity, and we attribute a great deal to the demise or the retirement of one particular person. While we have been focused on bin Laden and Al-Qaeda in South Asia, in Afghanistan and Pakistan, as we should be, and we've done terrific damage to them there. But what has happened since 9/11 is that Al-Qaeda had at 9/11 one major platform from which to train, arm, store weapons, amass manpower, which was Afghanistan. They're still in Afghanistan to some extent. They are in a large swath of Pakistan. They're approaching the point where they're controlling cities in Yemen. They're in Somalia. They're across North Africa and feeding on the prisons that were opened and the arsenals that were opened during the so-called Arab Spring. They're in Palestine, and they're causing havoc in Iraq at the moment. So Al-Qaeda is probably less talented at the leadership level, but in terms of geographical dispersion and the number of people actually in arms against the United States, that number is greater than it was on 9/11.
Let's go to the phones. Our first call for Mike Scheuer comes from Claremont, California. Don, on our line for Republicans. You're on the Washington Journal. Go ahead, Don.
Good morning, Rob. Good morning, sir.
Good morning.
I just saw the National Geographic program on 9/11, and I was kind of shocked. You know, I'm a person that I can't come up on what's probably the worst thing Bill Clinton did, whether it's Whitewater, Vince Foster, stains on blue dresses, the fact that he ruined or didn't take proper action on the financial situation, and how he can spend $7 million on a wedding for his daughter and say that's public service. But the big shock is to see that he had a chance to take out, in numerous cases, in your comment about the 10th city, that he would not act to take that out, and he is personally responsible, in my opinion, for all the people that died. I mean, that was a shock to me. Could you please elaborate, correct me if you're wrong? I'll stay on the line and further comment if necessary.
Well, sir, I think it's important for you or for any American not to have to rely on my word. I think all you need to do is go through the 9/11 Commission report, which in one of the few areas where it's completely accurate describes the 10 opportunities that Mr. Clinton had to kill Osama bin Laden. And it's always interesting to me that Mr. Bush is rather crucified for not taking action on the PDB of August 2001, warning that bin Laden was going to attack in the United States. When Mr. Bush got that message, he basically said, "What do I do? We don't know where Osama is. How can, what can we do to do something about this?" Well, Mr. Clinton never had that problem. And especially had he given us lethal authority, Mr. bin Laden would have been dead by the spring of 1999, and with consequences probably less disastrous than we've encountered since. So I think there is a lapse of criticism when it comes to Mr. Clinton. For example, I started the rendition program under Mr. Clinton, and yet Mr. Bush seems to be the one that gets hung with this.
Explain briefly what rendition is.
When we created it in August of 1995, the idea was to begin to dismantle al-Qaeda cells around the world by taking people off the street who were either planning to attack the United States or had involved in activities against us or our allies. The goals were simply to get them off the street and to grab whatever they had at the time in terms of electronic documents or paper documents, things they never expected the Americans to read. There was no intention to interrogate them because Mr. Clinton's administration didn't want to hold these people. They sent them to Egypt and they sent them to other places around the world. And the agency itself said to Mr. Clinton's White House that you're going to be, your State Department is going to be very critical of the countries where we're taking these people. And they said, oh, that's not a good thing. Can you, the CIA, get guarantees from the Egyptians that the Egyptians will treat them according to their own laws? And we said, yeah, we're pretty sure we can do that, but it doesn't get you off the hook. But they didn't mind. They didn't want to hold these people, and it's really only after 9/11.
And they were taken to countries like Egypt because?
They were taken to countries where there was an outstanding legal process for them. The only part of Al-Qaeda that we could go after were people who had an indictment or had been convicted in absentia or had been in prison and escaped. So if Al-Qaeda was a yard wide, we were able to operate only about 3 inches of that yard, and only in countries that were willing to help us. Europe was off the map, for example.
And willing to treat detainees or prisoners in ways that may have been prohibited by U.S. laws.
Yes, there was no consideration by the White House or the National Security Council about how the prisoners were treated once they got to a particular country. It was the agency that raised that with the White House more often than not.
Back to the phones. Mike Scheuer is our guest. Greenbelt, Maryland is where our next call comes from. Tony on our line for Democrats. You're on the Washington Journal.
Good morning, C-SPAN. Good morning, sir. I've been wanting to talk to you. You seem like a pretty bright guy, but I'll tell you what. I'm not buying the fact that you claim Osama bin Laden was behind the 9/11 attacks. I don't think he was. I don't know if Osama bin Laden has the capability to make blueprints or whatever, come up with this crazy notion that he can have 19 people get on 4 airplanes that's almost empty. And I guess every one of the terrorists, every one of the Muslims on each plane, terrorists. I don't buy that. And I don't buy the fact that Osama bin Laden can walk up and down mountains with sandals on and wear white clothes and a white hat, not get dirty. And he has a special cane to get up and down those mountains. It just seems very, very shaky to me with some of this nonsense that you guys spit out.
Tony in Greenbelt.
Well, everybody's got their own opinion, sir, and that's clearly part of being an American. You're right to express that opinion. You just happen to be dead wrong. The conspiracies that are rife in the United States today from the 9/11 truthers are really a brand of insanity, but an understandable insanity because the government itself tends to classify information, classify data far too frequently and far too high levels. And so I think in many cases the government secrecy policy breeds conspiracy. But I frankly, you know, your ideas are your ideas, but they just happen to be completely wrong.
Our next call comes from Ken in Argylite, Kentucky.
Yes, good morning.
Is that Argylite?
It's Argylite.
Argylite, okay, go ahead.
That's fine, sir. I had a question for Mr. Scheuer over there, and by the way, I think he's an intelligent man, in my opinion, but I was noticing since 9/11, just in my area nationwide, which I know they had to fold over a lot of the services of local law enforcement and courts and things like that, but it seems like, you know, that there's very little funding anymore for like local authority or, you know, crime, and I was wondering if he had any ideas how they might, you know, appropriate more money or you know, for that too, because you don't want to miss that as well as while we're being protected. And thank you for taking my call.
Well, I think there has been an enormous amount of spending, sir, on counterterrorism. Some of it worthwhile, some of it not worthwhile. We're in such a bind with money. I don't know where they would get more money for criminal activity, but certainly it is something that can't be ignored that just for the reason you're doing counterterrorism.
Next up, Los Angeles, California. Jim on our line for Independence. You're on the Washington Journal.
Thank you for taking my call. It's nice to be on there with Mike Scheuer. I'd like to address the main motivation for 9/11. If you look at page 147 of the 9/11 Commission Report and go to tinyurl.com/9/11 motivation, and that's U.S. support for Israel. Michael Scheuer had addressed that in his Imperial Hubris book. We don't see that addressed anywhere in the U.S. media when it comes to talking about motivation for 9/11 and the earlier attack on the World Trade Center in 1993. You can look up Israel as a terrorist motivation in the index of James Bamford's A Pretext for War book.
Jim, we'll leave it there. Michael Scheuer, your response, sir.
Yes, you know, this cuts to the heart of, I think, an issue that Americans really need to consider if they don't want to fight this war forever. American lifestyle, democracy, women in the workplace, elections, liberty, all of those things the Islamists, Al-Qaeda, its allies, would never have in a country that they governed. That's very clear. But the idea that has been pushed by President Clinton and President Bush and Mr. Cheney and Barack Obama and Senator McCain, that America is being attacked because of those things, is a disservice to the population of the United States. This war is not against Americans because we're Americans. It's against it's motivated by the activities of our government and its allies in the Muslim world. Certainly, Israel is an enormous problem for the United States and an enormous motivator for the Islamists who are active around the world, including in America and Canada and Britain. But it's not only that. It's our support for the Saudi police state. It is our exploitation of what, at low prices, at least as the Islamists consider it, of Middle Eastern oil, of Muslim oil. It's our presence on the Arabian Peninsula and our military activities in Iraq and Afghanistan and Yemen and Somalia and other places. And none of that is to say that those policies or actions are wrong. I would vote to change several of them very drastically, but that's not the point. The point is, unless you understand the motivation of your enemy, you are never going to be able to understand his durability, his intentions, or his ability to recruit in the coming generations. And that's where we are at the moment. And certainly, you can argue about whether you should support the Israelis or not support the Israelis. That's a perfectly legitimate debate. But when you say that Israel is an enormous burden on U.S. interests and our relationship with the Israelis is getting American soldiers killed overseas and threatening us at home, that's just a fact. You can't get away from that fact. And that's the fact that should form the basis of the conversation about whether we continue or not continue support for Israel.
Talk to us a little bit about the infrastructure, the power struggle that may be going on within the upper echelon of Al-Qaeda as to who is going to officially take over for Osama bin Laden. We've got a story here from Newsweek on May 16th, and it looks like the leading contender is Ayman al-Zawahiri. Is he still the go-to guy? Is he going to be number one?
Zawahiri has settled into the number one position, sir, and we have killed the person who was going to be, I think, number two. A man named Atiyah was killed in the last month in Afghanistan or Pakistan. Zawahiri is, as far as we can tell now, in control of the organization, and the question is how he will be perceived. He had a reputation for being a micromanager, a very abrasive individual, and one who was very conscious of being an Egyptian. We've been here 4,000 years in Egypt, and the rest of you Arabs are newcomers. If that kind of personality endures, he will not last long as leader of Al-Qaeda. But there's every reason to think that he's changed his behavior over the past couple of years, and certainly, generally speaking, Zawahiri is a much more vicious man than Osama bin Laden. And the move that we talked about earlier, from only large-scale attacks to planning a large-scale attack and using smaller-scale truck bombs, is certainly right up Zawahiri's alley.
And will he, if he maintains his status as the leader of Al-Qaeda, will he command them as a single unit, or will they be sent out, to borrow a phrase, as franchisees, or will they be independent contractors who don't have to answer to him or anybody else?
I think you'll have a variety of all three, sir, but I think at the moment what we do know from the documents captured from Osama bin Laden's residence in Pakistan is that the central core of Al-Qaeda remained at least in contact with its so-called franchises, and also had some influence in what they were going to do. It is not a command and control relationship in the strictest sense of the word. The Yemenis will conduct operations as they wish. The people in Yemen, the people in Somalia, those in North Africa will conduct, but they're all moving in the same direction.
Michael Scheuer, as we've mentioned, is the former CIA Bin Laden unit chief from 1996 to 1999, which he created. He resigned after 22 years of service with CIA in 2004. His books include Imperial Hubris: Why the West is Losing the War on Terror, and From Pandora's Box: America and Militant Islam After Iraq. We continue our questions with Richmond, Michigan. Ed, on our line for Democrats. You're on the Washington Journal.
Hello.
Go ahead, Ed.
Okay, I'd like to make 3 remarks, and then I'll hold. Sir, you've been on other programs like CNN. You leave the impression that Bill Clinton could have gotten Bin Laden. Now, there was he lobbed missiles into their training camp, but there's an airplane that landed there, and they had a tall man with garbs on, standing next to this Arabic plane with Arabic markings, and it was possible that either a Saudi or UAE prince was on that plane. They didn't want to take a chance of killing somebody else. The other remark is that special forces had Bin Laden pretty well on their markings, and the head of the special forces has written in the book that he requested a little more money and men, and at the same time Bush told General Franks to stop everything and to make plans to go into Iraq. So that's my remark, and I appreciate your remarks.
Mr. Clinton certainly did have the chance to kill Osama bin Laden when he was hobnobbing with some princes from the United Arab Emirates on a daily basis for more than a month in February and March of 1999. I think what you don't know is Mr. Clinton was about to authorize the sale of $8 billion worth of F-16s to the king or the crown prince of the United Arab Emirates. And instead of killing bin Laden to protect American citizens and to prevent the death of American citizens, he had Richard Clarke call the United Arab Emirates and warn them that we knew that they were in the desert and that bin Laden was there also, and it would be good for them to leave. And they did leave. So Mr. Clinton, on that particular opportunity, which was the best, the world is lousy with princes. One dead prince isn't going to make a big difference. One dead bin Laden would have made a huge difference for those 3,000 people who died at 9/11. But on that particular occasion, Clinton chose to sell fighter planes to Arabs over protecting Americans.
Next up is Muscle Shoals, Alabama. Howard on our line for Republicans. You're on the Washington Journal.
Thank you. Appreciate you taking my call. Am I on?
Go ahead, Howard.
Okay, I'm an old man, and years ago, I remember the only people allowed into this country were those that wanted to be Americans. But the progressives, they changed all that and made us an open country, open borders, and allowed everybody in that wanted to come in. And that's why we had 9/11. Years before, those people could not have even got into this country. And then, besides that, all the millions of dollars we've had to spend protecting ourselves from the people they allowed in here. And I'll tell you, America out there, none of us feel safe when we go to the airport, when we go to Chicago, Detroit, New York, or wherever we go. We don't really feel safe. You don't feel safe when you get on the subway. And this was all because of the progressives. They blaming whoever they want.
Howard, we'll leave it there. Michael Scheuer.
I think there is an argument to be made that only in America in the 21st century could you define national defense without insisting that there be some sort of control over your borders. As we talked earlier, I think if the three men who apparently are in our country to conduct car bombings came over borders and snuck in rather than came through official entry points, then the whole discussion of border control is going to become relevant again. Certainly America has always needed immigrants. We need immigrants today, but the argument that we don't need some sort of a orderly way to process those immigrants, I think, is wrong. Our police and law enforcement now have, whatever the number is, 10 or 12 million people in this country who we don't know who they are or why they're here. I think that's a very big security problem, and it really needs to be discussed rationally and addressed.
We've got a tweet from Joe, American Hero, and he writes, how does this guy, you, argue that a human being should be summarily killed by our government without being charged with a crime or a trial?
I would kill anyone who threatens the United States. This is not a law and order business. Osama bin Laden was a man who declared war on the United States and stated his intention to kill as many Americans as it took to get us to remove ourselves from the Middle East. He wasn't sure. We heard that declaration in 1996. He repeated it in 1998. We have, in an odd way, our educational system is probably what's on trial here more than anything else, in the sense that we have somehow taught children that war is an anomaly rather than a commonplace in human affairs, and that when you fight a war, the only way to win is to kill the enemy in whatever numbers that are sufficient to make him stop fighting you. In a wartime situation, the idea that we apply law enforcement activities overseas is perhaps good for the FBI's budget. It is terrible for the security of the United States.
Next up, Anna on our line for Democrats in DeSoto, Texas. You're on the Washington Journal.
Good morning, gentlemen. First of all, I don't have, the gentleman from Alabama, I don't have any fear about getting on planes or anything else. Being a 63-year-old African-American, there was more terrorists growing up here than from bin Laden. And secondly, I remember President Clinton, and it was on the media, doing the Monica Lewinsky scandal and him lying in the before the grand jury, that he went in to bomb bin Laden. And the Republicans came out and other members said, oh, my God, this man is going to go in there, bomb Afghanistan to take the heat off of him and Monica Lewinsky. So I think there needs to be clarification on that. So many people lie. And how do you build a huge compound in Pakistan? Pakistan is one of the issues. We give them all of this money, and he builds a compound, and nobody knows he's there. And then when President Obama comes in, you know, here Dick Cheney said, oh, because of the intelligence that we got, we really are responsible for that. Can you address that for me, please?
Michael Scheuer.
Well, intelligence is a process of accumulating small pieces of information that finally come together, either because they make sense of themselves or you collect another piece that makes them make sense. And I think it's probably fair to say that part of the information that it enabled the president to kill Osama bin Laden was gathered under the auspices of the Bush administration. But it should not be the Bush administration should not be praised for that. The intelligence officers who collected it should be praised for that, and they work for whatever government is in place in the United States. Mr. Clinton did indeed bomb host in Afghanistan on the 20th of August, 1998, after our embassies were destroyed in East Africa on the 7th of August. They didn't kill bin Laden at the time, but what people don't realize is that we had a chance to kidnap bin Laden in the third week of May 1998, before the embassies were attacked, and Mr. Clinton canceled that operation. So whether Clinton was a Democrat or a Republican, I can assure you from working inside the intelligence community in the area of terrorism, he was not interested in protecting Americans. He was interested in protecting his own person, He was interested in protecting his reputation, and he was interested in selling airplanes to the Arabs and treating the Taliban with kid gloves because he supported a gas pipeline running from Turkmenistan through Kandahar to Karachi in Pakistan.
Talk to us about the episode, I believe it was during the Bush administration, where they thought they had bin Laden in Tora Bora.
Yeah.
And didn't take him out there. How is that different from the members of the Clinton administration not acting on intelligence that they had on where bin Laden was and what they could do with him?
I don't think there is a difference, sir. I think they had a wonderful opportunity at Tora Bora to go after Osama bin Laden and kill him or capture him at the time. And certainly the troops on the ground, the Marines and the 10th Mountain Division, were dying to do that. But the generals at that time in our military were bureaucrats. They hadn't fought a war. They didn't know what they were doing, except they knew dead American soldiers is bad public relations. And so they subcontracted the job. Instead of using our troops, they subcontracted the job to a couple of Afghans who had fought with bin Laden against the Soviets in the 1980s. And when we did the traces on the names of those two Afghans, we sent the information back to the field and said, these guys are going to be a day late and a dollar short. And they were, and they got away. Bin Laden lived from 2001 to 2011 because I gather that the White House did not press those generals to use our own troops to do our own dirty work.
Where does al-Qaeda get its money these days, and is there any way that we can squeeze that money source?
A lot of the money comes from private donations, from wealthy Arabs who believe al-Qaeda and other Islamist groups are doing God's work on earth. Some of the money came from bin Laden's family, his inheritance. Donations in mosques are taken up around the world. They're involved in the movement of counterfeit currency, and there's money to be made there. Al-Qaeda itself has always been very active in exporting gemstones from Afghanistan, rubies and garnets and lapis lazuli. And of course, the enormous moneymaker for the Taliban and probably some flow-through to Al-Qaeda is the heroin industry. So there are no shortages of money. And the problem for the United States is that the Treasury Department is very good at stopping money in Western banks if they can identify an account that's a terrorist account or a bad account. But most times, business in the Muslim world is cash and carry, and you really don't have an opportunity to freeze anything.
Ian in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, on our line for Independence. You're on the Washington Journal with Michael Scheuer.
Yeah, I had a question about the general efficacy of our intelligence gathering operations kind of on a global level, because how can we trust any of this intelligence when all of our most sensitive databases have been penetrated by friendly nations like the Israelis? And especially considering that we know the prime beneficiary of these terrorist attacks is Israel.
Well, I'm not as expert at all, sir, on cyber warfare, but increasingly we're facing threats from both nation states and from non-nation states, terrorist groups, organized crime groups, in the security of our computer files. But that's got to be fixed. I don't know how to do it. I'm not a computer person at all, but certainly China, Israel, other nation states do try to raid our databases, our governmental databases, and also our industrial databases to get an advantage from surreptitiously gaining access to industrial plans or particular pieces of equipment. So it is very big and growing danger, as I understand it. The government seems to be taking some action at the moment against that problem.
Next up, Philip in Louisville, Kentucky, on our line for Republicans. Philip, you're on the Washington Journal.
Hello. Good morning, young man.
Go ahead, sir.
Hello. I would like to know, how are we doing anything about the terrorist cells that funneling money out the country? How are we locating themselves and freezing their money and stopping the terrorist cells? Are we doing anything about that?
I believe there was just a gentleman in New York arrested yesterday or the day before for sending several $1,000s, I believe, to the Taliban in Afghanistan. And I think that the Treasury Department and the FBI and other people try very hard to do that. And as I said just a minute ago, we're very good at stopping money if it's in a Western bank. We have good vision into the Western banking system with our allies. But if it's a matter of carrying cash or transferring money via gemstones or jewelry or something like that, then it becomes much more difficult.
Nashville, Tennessee, Alan on our line for independence. Go ahead, Alan.
Hi, I wanted to take issue with the guy from the CIA and go back a little bit in your history and take a look at your history. Ronald Reagan funded bin Laden, and this is the reason that Dick Cheney said a long time ago, without hesitation, that he absolutely knew that there was weapons in Iraq, and that was the reason for going to Iraq and starting this war. Okay? All right. He knew it because we funded bin Laden. We took care of bin Laden, and the CIA was complicit in that. When Clinton cut the budget back on CIA turned on him and said, well, okay, we'll give him disinformation and pieces of information and say this is possible and that's possible and leave it all up in the air. When George Bush was sitting in the White House, we got hit on September 11th. He had 10 days. In that 10 days, he knew exactly within a half a mile where Osama bin Laden was, and if he'd have had the guts of Harry Truman and had dropped a nuclear bomb in Kandahar, this would have been over 10 years ago. But it's turned into an industry for the CIA guys like this guy that wants to write a book and make $1 million out of it.
Michael Scheuer.
Well, that's again, you're entitled to your own ideas. They're completely wrong, but you know, you're entitled to them, sir. Unfortunately, I think for us, the CIA, bin Laden would not deal with us during the war against the Soviets. He made it very clear that he hated us then. He had his own sources of money. He had his own sources of armaments and steered clear of us. And frankly, he was on the side of the angels at the time because he was killing Russians, and that was the goal of the operation. I'm very confident that you're wrong, that Mr. Bush had any idea of the location of Osama bin Laden. Whether he would have killed him if he had the opportunity to do so, I can't address that. But I was there at the time, and we did not know where Osama bin Laden was in August of 2001. Unlike, unfortunately for you, I suppose, Mr. Clinton's raft of opportunities to kill Osama bin Laden.
In your opinion, could Osama bin Laden have held up in Pakistan for as long as he did without the knowledge of the Pakistani government and the Pakistani military?
I think some people in the government and the military almost certainly knew where he was, sir. But I think also, at least within the intelligence community after 9/11, the one thing we were very confident of was that Pakistan would never be the agent of turning him over or killing him or helping us to kill him, because it wasn't in their interests. American politicians, whether they're Democrats or Republicans, very often operate under the wrong assumption that everyone's national interests are the same as ours. Pakistan's interests were not ours, and yet they helped us by doing a number of things that weren't in their interest. They now have a civil war in their own territory, for example, because of the degree they helped us. The real question is not why didn't Pakistan get him? The question is, why did two U.S. governments under two different parties delegate their responsibility to protect Americans to a third world dictatorship?
Next up, Birmingham, Alabama. Jan on our line for Democrats here on the Washington Journal.
Thank you. I worked in Saudi Arabia for 12 years, between 1977 and 1989, okay? I worked with a lot of the Saudis. I worked in the refinery as well as all different parts of the company because I was the independent consultant for the Aramco and the Saudi government, okay? In many cases, I heard Saudis tell me our blind support of Israel, okay? And I often wondered, every time I saw us giving money to Israel, something would happen that would keep that war going rather than diminish that war. And I don't know what Mr. Scheur's involvement or his understanding of that is, if he'd ever been to Saudi to get a chance to talk with people and things like that, but I talk with them constantly, every day. And a lot of the guys, when I worked in the refinery, when they took their 30-day vacation, they went to Afghanistan to fight war. And matter of fact, I had one guy bring me a hat back. I saw many pictures. They would take photos of helicopters they had shot down, people they had killed, which were kind of gruesome. But since I was there and they were working for me, I had to go along with them. And sure, I looked at them and I understood what they were saying.
And we'll leave it there. Michael Scheuer.
I think it's an important point, sir. You know, Osama bin Laden was not an anomaly for the Saudi educational system. He was indeed the poster boy for its successes. And next to, or along with countries like Russia and China, Saudi Arabia is an enormous threat to the United States and the West generally because of the manner in which it exports a brand of Islam that is anti-Western, anti-Christian, anti-Jewish, and certainly much more vicious and intolerant than anything that Osama bin Laden himself pushed ahead. The Saudis are, like the Israelis, extraordinarily powerful in our Congress because of the influence and the money they have used to buy support from various congressmen. The Saudis in particular are very influential in our oil industry and in our arms industry. They're always buying billions of dollars of guns from us. And our presidents, Republican and Democrat, pretend that the Saudis are our best friends and our reliable allies, and I think that's exactly wrong. They are a malign influence, not only for the United States, but for the Western community as a whole.
We've got a tweet from Bill Beatty, who writes, there's a prayer flash mob at the 9/11 anniversary. Everyone will begin to sing Amazing Grace when Mayor Bloomberg starts to talk. Our last call for Michael Scheuer comes from Dothan, Alabama. Joe on our line for Republicans. Go ahead.
Yes, first of all, thank you for your 22 years of service.
Thank you, sir.
And providing us a blanket of freedom that some people don't understand, that there's a lot of lost lives in providing this. But more importantly, I believe that if this country required our children when they turned 18 to give us 2 years of service, the other countries would realize that we're militarily trained completely as civilians, that they would think twice before they would attack us because any one of us could cap them. B, these young people need to understand, being an American, there's always a price to pay, but they want it for free. So I think we should require that they understand that there's a price for freedom, but more importantly, they should be required to pay it before they start their adulthood, so that then maybe they have a sense of direction as to, they're not Mexican-American. I'm an American of Hispanic descent. I think people should either be Americans first or the hell out.
Joe in Dothan, Alabama. Michael Scheuer.
Well, we've certainly come to the point with our military, sir, that we are stretched to the limit and are very understaffed, I think. And we're probably at the point where one more major crisis that requires the deployment of an American army overseas, that the draft will become a new or a renewed source of debate in this country. I have to say that I think a conscript army would make the politicians much more conscious of the losses our military suffers. We're going to withdraw from Iraq and Afghanistan in defeat. We have accomplished nothing there that we set out to accomplish, not because of the military, but because of the restraints put on the military by Mr. Bush and Mr. Obama. And it's always seemed to me to be criminal to go to war without intending to win. And we have now generals who don't even use the word victory or win. They're hearts and minds folks like Petraeus and McChrystal. And I think certainly a conscript army would put pressure on any government, Republican or Democrat, to, if they get into a war, to win it clearly and get everybody home, instead of using Marines who are trained to kill in America's defense to build irrigation systems and clinics for people who want to kill them no matter how much help we expend.
One final question. In the National Journal, they had this article with the title 9/11, with 9/11 anniversary comes Al-Qaeda 2.0. Moving forward, where are the hearts and minds of Al-Qaeda? Is this 10th anniversary as significant for them as it is for us, or is this just another day where they hate Americans and want to destroy our way of life?
Al-Qaeda has never been much keyed to anniversaries. American politicians, on the other hand, are always keyed to anniversaries. We worked endless numbers of Thanksgivings and Christmas because we expected an attack then. This is a different anniversary. It's the 10th anniversary. I think that's the smallest motivation. The second motivation is that there is an enormous eagerness to extract an eye for an eye in return for killing Osama bin Laden. Third, and most important for Al-Qaeda, their recipe for defeating us has always included trying to bleed us to bankruptcy. Our economy is very clearly on the ropes at the moment, and anything they can do to push us further toward the precipice financially, that's what they intend to do. So it's almost like a little perfect storm coming together at this particular point in time.
Michael Scheuer, former CIA Bin Laden unit chief, thank you very much for being on the program.
My pleasure, sir, always.
We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, a discussion on the Homeland Security Department 10 years after its creation. You're watching the Washington Journal. Today is Saturday, September 10th. We'll be right back.